really, I feel like what people should be doing is looking at those books and thinking like, why do people like it?
Right.
And trying to figure out why and maybe apply that lesson to their own writing, because people don't connect with art because they're like, oh my God, there's so few things wrong with this book. Oh, I love it.
Right.
They connect with it because there's something about it that they really love and that they really enjoy.
What does it take to become a successful science fiction or fantasy writer? You're listening to the greatest podcast in the multiverse, the show that aims to provide you with writing tips, tricks, and inspiration for your author career by chatting with other successful science fiction and fantasy authors. I am your host, Herman Stewart-Nagel. I'm an author who is eager to learn more. I hope you'll join me in these conversations to learn and grow in your own writing, and maybe to find a new favorite book or author along the way. Ready to explore? Because on this show, every conversation is a doorway into a different world. Hello everyone, welcome to the greatest podcast in the multiverse. I apologize, first of all, for the hiatus that I have been on for the last few weeks. I know I said I was going to be releasing episodes every couple of weeks. Things got really busy, things got really crazy, and I had to kind of push things off for a while. So I do apologize for that. In saying that though, this is my final episode for 2024, and then I'm going to be putting the show on hiatus for the foreseeable future. I don't have a timeline set up yet, but it's definitely going to be at the earliest sometime in the new year, and potentially longer than that. The reason being, as I mentioned in the last episode, this has taken a lot of my time in the past year, and looking at what I wanted to achieve this year and what I did achieve as far as my writing goes, I needed the extra time to focus on my writing and on publishing my books, because I do have ambitious goals for 2025. And I want to make sure I meet those. This has kind of always been a side project. My writing is already a side project as far as income goes, because I do have a full-time day job. So I am putting this on hold for the time being. I do plan on being back in the future. I just do not have a estimated time for that just yet. So a couple things to watch out for in the new year from me. If I'm hoping February or March, I'll be launching my next Kickstarter campaign. It'll be for my upcoming book, The Greatest Pub in the Multiverse. It'll be a special edition version. It'll have even more drink recipes, even more artwork, and it's going to be really cool. I'm going to have all sorts of awesome stuff coming out with it, so watch out for that. And then following that, in April, The Greatest Pub in the Multiverse will be released in market formats anywhere that you buy books. So keep that in mind. You can already hit pre-order on that on Amazon, and a lot of ebook format and a lot of the stores online. So check that out. Other than that, I'm hoping to get at least 2 other books out next year. We'll see how that goes. I had plans for 2 or 3 books this year, and I managed to get 1 published, and then I have another one mostly written. It will be written, at least the first draft, by the end of the year. Hopefully the final draft will be off to edits by the time January hits. But so like I said, I'm going to be using the extra time that I took spending on this podcast and dedicating it to my books, because that is really my end goal. And there's only so many hours in a day, so many hours in a week, and I want to make sure that I hit the goals that I've set out to do. So thank you all for joining me. Thank you all for listening. This is not going to be a final goodbye. I do plan on coming back and interviewing other great authors, because this podcast has been such an amazing experience, and I wouldn't trade the last year that I have been running it, last year and a half really, for anything. I've met so many incredible authors. I've made a lot of new friends and talked to authors that I could only have imagined talking to a year or 2 ago, which is a great segue, because one of those authors is Andrea Stewart. You may know her from her book, The Bone Shard Daughter, or her latest release, The Gods Below. We had a great conversation. It was a wonderful chat, and I hope you stick around for it. I just was thrilled that I was able to speak with Andrea, and we had a great time. So stick around, check it out, and until next time, we'll chat soon. So welcome once again to the greatest podcast in the multiverse. I'm super excited to have Andrea Stewart with me here today. Andrea is the best-selling author of The Bone Shard Daughter, and we're here to talk about her new book, The Gods Below. I'm so excited. I've been reading it. I'm not quite done yet, but it is so good. Um,
Oh, yay. I'm so glad that you're enjoying it.
I love it. I absolutely love it. I'm having I'm having a hard time putting it down, except for when I miss my desk and drop it on the ground. But
That's one way to put it down.
that's one way to put it down. That's right. But yeah, no, I'm loving it so far. But Andrea, why don't you kick us off for those of you who might not be familiar with you? Just tell us a little bit about who you are and your writing journey so far.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Andrea Stewart, in case you didn't catch that. I have a trilogy out that starts with Bone Shard Daughter called The Drowning Empire. I just started a new epic fantasy trilogy called The Hollow Covenant and starts with The Gods Below. As far as my writing journey, I say that I'm a slow learner because I've basically been writing since I was a kid. I started my first manuscript in fifth grade, and I've just been doing that ever since. The earliest record of a query letter I can find is 2007 in my email.
Oh, wow.
I am pretty sure that I was querying before that because I remember doing the SASEs, the self-addressed stamped envelopes with my queries.
Going way back.
Yeah. But I always just say, oh, well, I started querying in 2007. And that didn't work out for me until 2013. I queried multiple books. I did finally get representation in 2013. And then we went out on submission with that book after revisions. It died on submission. I wrote another book. We did extensive revisions on that. That went out on submission. It died on submission. And then I wrote The Bone Shard Daughter. And we sold that in 2019 and it came out in 2020. So that was like my whole my whole journey there.
I love that. I love your journey a lot. I've heard you talk about it before. And I kind of want to delve into a couple pieces of it. First of all, I guess, what do you kind of remember the spark of why you started writing? Like, why was this something, since grade 5, you've had this lifelong drive to be an author. Do you remember kind of what sparked that and how you began?
Well, I think I'd always just been telling stories from a very young age. My mom has actually the story that I dictated to her. I told her to write it down when I was 3.
Oh, wow.
It is a very bad story. But yeah, it wasn't until I hit 5th grade and then my teacher had us do a creative writing exercise and I wrote a short story and she really, really liked it. And it kind of encouraged me to actually start writing my own manuscript at that point. I'd always been a very big reader. Like my parents took us to the library basically every week and I would just go through as many books as possible. And I very much gravitated toward fantasy, I think, because I was a very lonely child and I was a very outcast kind of child, So it's like, well, of course I want to read books about, people going out and saving the kingdom and, defeating evil and starting out from this place of being an outcast and a person that is kind of looked down upon, right? An underdog. So I definitely gravitated toward that. So that was the kind of stories that I started to write.
Nice. Yeah, that's really cool. Was there a particular story that you remember that really inspired you into the fantasy genre?
Oh gosh, there's so many. So when I was a kid, I was reading Lloyd Alexander, who wrote the Prydain Chronicles.
Okay.
And that was very inspiring for me. Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis, The Hobbit, of course. Yeah. Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle. Nice. Now that's one that I've returned to over and over again because I feel like I've gotten different things out of it as I've gotten older. Like when I was younger, I was like, this is a story about the last unicorn. And then as I got older, I was like, wow, this is actually a story about a lot more than just that.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, it was a lot of books, I think.
Yeah, okay, cool. Now, as far as your querying process and that, you had a long stretch where it was, you were getting rejected, you weren't finding an agent, and then when you finally found an agent, you went through a process of having to write multiple books before getting picked up. In a way, that's inspiring, but I imagine at the time it didn't feel that way.
What's funny though is every time I had some big setback, I'd talk to my friends and I'd be like, you know what? at least like when I finally do make it, I'll have a very inspiring story to tell. So that was like part of my motivation.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, for me, I feel like I kind of had to come to peace with the fact that like maybe it would never happen. And I kind of came to a place where I was like, well, I just kind of have to be okay with this and appreciate the process itself and feel like that's worth something, because otherwise I feel like you can kind of send yourself into this weird spiral where
Right.
you're thinking about mortality and what have I been doing with my life? I've just been doing this thing where I just constantly get rejected. It was a little easier for me, I think, after I got an agent, because then at least I knew there was like a professional who was in my corner who still believed in me.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah,
then
I
it felt a little
imagine
less depressing.
for sure. Yeah, I imagine that having that piece of it makes it a little easier than you sitting at home writing a query or like letter after letter querying, trying to find that agent, I'm sure. Um,
Yeah, it is very much like a silo, right? Where
yeah.
you don't know what's going on outside.
Yeah, and so you'd written, I mean, you would come to, I guess, to accept that it might not happen. But I guess, you were still determined to continue with the process anyway. I guess, how did that look in the moment when you were, working on your third book? You had written a number of books that hadn't gone anywhere already. What's that what's that like for you, and what was it like when you got the first offer?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, I mean, part of it was I just told myself if I keep practicing, if I keep trying, if I keep getting better, at a certain point I'll get so good that it will be hard to ignore me. Not to say that people could not ignore me, but it would be harder, right? So that was
Yeah.
kind of something that I was working toward. And part of it is just self-improvement, right? Like I could see that it wasn't where I wanted it to be yet. So what do? You just keep trying. Um, as far as when I got the first offer, oh my gosh, that was like the best thing ever. Dream come true. I was like checking my phone at weird hours of the morning because that was my agent was in the UK,
Okay,
so
right.
they're 8 hours ahead.
Yeah, right. Sometimes you're at midnight, you're looking at your phone.
Right, and then
Right,
I
yeah.
would get to work and I wouldn't be able to like do that as much.
Hmm.
So yeah, it was pretty great. We went out and celebrated. That was not the offer that we ended up landing on.
Okay.
Because it actually it's funny because like they say that nothing happens in publishing, and then it all happens very fast. And that was
Hmm.
very true for me, because when we went out with the Bone Shard Daughter, the first offer I got was was within the first 2 weeks. And then we started getting more offers. And then we had to decide, do we take this to auction or do we take this preempt that we got from Orbit? We ended up doing that, but it was so surreal, like absolutely, because it's something that I had been working toward my entire life. I was like 37 at the time. And, so I wasn't like some like young kid right out of college, right?
Right.
I'd been doing this for a while. The people at work did not know that I was a writer, so I had to have a very interesting conversation with my boss when the preempt after the preempt came through and we decided to take that. It was
Yeah,
like,
right.
hey, so I'm an author and also I'm quitting my job. So, but yeah, no, if I could store those memories somewhere and just relive them, that would be amazing. I mean, I actually
Right.
do go back and reread the emails sometimes just to be like, oh yeah, it was like a crazy time of my life. It was a really
Yeah.
amazing time of my life. And now like everything has kind of shifted and it's very different.
Right.
5 years ago was doing
Yeah.
something very, very different.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, and everything has changed since then. So what is it like now where you're at now, as an author 5 years later, looking back, what is some advice that you would give to past self or maybe to writers who are going through that process where they're trying to find an agent or they're trying to get a deal and it's just not hitting for them? Is there advice that you would give?
I mean, the biggest thing is just persistence.
Hmm.
Like if you just keep knocking on that door, like you will get hard to ignore if you keep trying to improve your writing. I think one of the biggest things that changed for me between writing my previous book and then writing The Bone Shard Daughter is that I stopped looking at critiquing things as much and looked more at like analyzing the things that I enjoyed.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Okay.
because like
So tell me more about that.
okay, so I tell people, and I really do believe this is true, because I think that what happens sometimes is that people get overly focused on critique.
Okay.
They'll look at published work that is very popular, and they'll say like, oh, these are the things that are wrong with it. It's a terribly written book. It's not good. I don't know why people like it. But really, I feel like what people should be doing is looking at those books and thinking like, why do people like it?
Right.
And trying to figure out why, and maybe apply that lesson to their own writing, because people don't connect with art because they're like, oh my God, there's so few things wrong with this book. I love it.
Right.
They connect with it because there's something about it that they really love and that they really enjoy.
Yeah.
So if you can take that and apply that to your book. So when I wrote The Bone Shard Daughter, I was like, what are the things that I really, really love when I read fantasy? And I'm like, I love animal companions. I love like world mysteries. I love the way that these things unfold and the way that the characters interact. So I love it when there's still a sense of humor, because even when things are really dark, like, people are still quite funny.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's the advice that I would give to people that are really banging their head against the wall. It's like persistence, and then analyze the things that you enjoy. Try to apply that to your own work.
I love that. I really love that so much, because I've never thought about it in those terms, where you're looking at books people love, and trying to figure, instead of trying to figure out what did people not like about those things about this book. I'm not going to do those things, but completely ignoring the things they loved about them and what brought them to those books in the first place, or over and over again, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. I love it. So how about your writing process? Are you a plotter? Are you a pantser? How do you put your books together? And has
Oh
it
God.
changed since your first book?
It changes from book to book.
Okay.
I say that I am aspirationally organized because I write these beautiful, like, long plots, and then I start writing it and it turns out it's all wrong. I have, it's wretched. It's wretched. I hate my process. I wish it were better. So with The Bone Shard Daughter, I actually like wrote that in like 3 months. I didn't do very many revisions, and I wish I wish I could repeat that process, but no, apparently what I do is I fiddle around with my outline forever. I write a bunch of words. I throw them out because I'm not going in the right direction. And then everything clicks together. And then the writing process goes very smoothly.
Right.
but I'm like, can't I just skip all of that like just trash that I ended up throwing away?
Right.
But, I think it's a little bit different too, because when I wrote The Bone Shard Daughter, I spent a lot of time like daydreaming and thinking about it before I actually sat down to write it. I don't know what that says about my focus on my day job, but, but I was getting good performance reviews, so it's fine. But, it was like, it was one of those things where I think that I spent just a lot of time thinking and dreaming about it. And then like, once you hit a career, once you're hitting that, like, okay, we're on contract, we're doing like a book a year, you don't have that luxury anymore. So I feel like probably all this stuff that I'm doing that I have to throw out is like my way of like forcing the daydreaming to go a little bit faster than it did before. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as long as the process, works, obviously the process works for you.
It does eventually.
Yeah. Yeah. But I know, definitely understand the feeling of throwing out words and, having the intent to outline and then it just like disappearing in the process because the story wants to do something completely different once you start going.
I do finally end up with a very beautiful outline that does work, but I go through multiple iterations that do not work, and it's very frustrating.
Yeah, right. Now, so in part of that, in relation to that, like your books have multiple points of views, and they are really kind of intricately woven like within each other. How does that process look of developing, each storyline and making sure it all works kind of within the same?
That's, I think, part of why I end up throwing out a lot of outlines is because I have to really try to figure out what's happening in each storyline. And so what I'll do is I have like a document where I'll just write out each storyline individually. And at the top of those, I'll put what the themes of that storyline are, what the character arc is. So I can always keep that in mind while I'm writing what things they're actually doing.
Mhm.
And then I go and I like break those down into chapters. And then I go and I put them in Plotter, which is amazing. I used to use Excel. Would not recommend it. Possible, but not as fun. So I put them in Plotter, and then I basically go and I move them around until it's in a place that makes sense. Like, okay, well, these two characters are interacting here. Clearly, they need to be in the same spot. Um, and then I have to like figure out like chronologically, does this work?
Right.
And oh my gosh, wait, these two characters are supposed to be interacting, but they're on opposite sides of the world. How do I fix that? So it's like, it's this process of kind of weaving it together, but also going back and like unweaving things or picking things apart and then putting it in a different spot. So
Right.
yeah, it's quite complicated. This is why I keep saying, like, after this, I can't believe I did like one epic fantasy trilogy and I'm going straight into another one. Like, what was I thinking? Definitely I'm taking a break from epic fantasy trilogies after I finish this one. I have a couple of standalones that I want to do. So, but yeah, it's like, it's a little like brain breaking. I feel like just when I get everything looking perfect, I'll find something that's like, oh wait, this doesn't work. Inevitably, even when I go to edits, there will be something that my editor points out, like, hey, so this thing is happening before this thing, but the chapter is after this other chapter. And then I'll be like, oh God, yeah, you're right. Then I have to go back and like readjust everything.
Yeah, right. So like, and so you're doing this process before you start drafting, or are you kind of in the midst of drafting while
No,
you're
I do it
still...
before I start drafting.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I do go ahead and make sure that everything is like laid out okay beforehand, because honestly, I feel like even though I am not as organized as I would like to be, I feel like if I were less organized, it would be even more of a mess than it already is.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, the fewer words you can throw out at the end of the day, the better, right?
Right. And it's still a lot of words.
Yeah, for sure. Now, like, do you write each point of view, like, do you write chronologically the story?
I write chronologically.
Okay,
yeah,
you're not-
yeah.
you're
So
not
you'd think that
focusing.
I would not miss those points where the chronology doesn't make sense, but I still do. But yeah, once I have each one outlined individually and I've interwoven them and make sure that their arc is all like kind of lining up, I do go through and just write chronologically, because I feel like, I mean, sometimes it helps me identify those chronology errors or errors where the characters are not in the right spot, and then I can fix it as I go. And it also helps me to feel that like that rising tension, you know, where everything is like you're hitting toward the climax of the book, and then I'm hitting that around the same time with each of the characters, right? And I want to make sure that I do that, because if one character, if they're hitting that like, you know, dark moment climax before the other ones, then their storyline just peters out. So it's a matter of balance too. And then in addition to that, you want to balance the points of view. So you want to make sure that you're not losing anybody for too long.
Right.
So that's always a challenge.
Yeah. You know, that actually surprises me in a way, because, you know, in the Gods Below especially, like the chapters are quite short. So I'm really impressed that you're able to continue the flow, you know, from chapter to chapter and continue with that story as you're writing, if you're doing it chronologically. Like, do you have any challenges with that?
I do. I do try to keep my chapters like around or under 3,000 words. So like 1,500 to 3,000 is ideal for me, just because I feel like it does feel a little bit pacier, and I try to, you know, end my chapters on like cliffhangers or like revelations or something, you know? So yeah, I mean, it can be challenging sometimes when I'm like really deep in one character's voice and then I'm switching to another one. I have found myself like accidentally writing in somebody else's voice, and then I'm like, wait. I gotta like rewind and go back and fix this. But especially when I'm like really going, like right now, I'm like really cranking away on it, because I just had that experience like a few weeks ago where everything just clicked into place.
Nice.
So now I'm like, well, I'm facing deadline in, like, I don't know, 5 weeks. So
Wow.
Yeah.
That's, you know, that must be, you know, so like you just had, so The Gods Below just came out. We'll talk a little bit more about that book in a minute. So it just came out a few weeks ago, and you've got a deadline coming up in another month. So, I mean, are
Yeah.
you able to enjoy the release of a book when you've got a deadline
You know,
meeting, that sort of
I
thing?
try my best because I feel like if you don't celebrate these moments, like nobody's like, you don't get a lot of like in person, like other people celebrating you kind of thing with this. It's
Hmm.
not like somebody else throws you a party. So you kind of have to throw yourself a little bit of a party and like make it
Hmm.
fun and make it special because otherwise I feel like, especially because publishing is such a bumpy road,
Yeah, right.
that you lose those bright moments if you don't like pick them out and like study them and do something about them.
Yeah,
so
right.
so I've been trying to like I went out to dinner with my husband. I'm like, we are celebrating my bestseller list.
Awesome. I love it.
um yeah, like wore my tiara around a little bit just for fun.
I'll bet.
But yeah, I feel like if you don't make it fun like that, then you lose the fun of all of it. I mean, not to say that I don't fall into that trap because I constantly do. Like right now, I'm just like go go go, and already like the bestseller list feels like a blip. But I need to be better about it.
You've had a lot of events and a lot of that sort of thing as well, kind of along the way. So I can imagine it feel, the pace of it, especially because I'm sure this book is a book you wrote a year ago, and it's just come out, and so now you're trying to celebrate something that has been out, that been done in your mind for a while, and you're already on to looking at the next one, right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
funny because I have to keep going back and flipping through book one because I'm like, did I cover this in book one? I can't remember.
Mm.
So, so I have it like next to me on my desk while I'm writing so I can just go back and like cross check things. But it is funny. Like, it is weird. I do feel like, especially after finishing a trilogy, that it kind of just flees your mind once you've finished. One of my friends, and I find this quite funny, has said the reason that we forget books after we've written them is because writing a book is a traumatic experience. um,
Yeah.
and I'm like, that's kind of true. I feel
Yeah.
like it's kind of true. But yeah, I do find it hard to remember the things that I've written there, especially when my focus is so heavily right now on getting book two finished.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's understandable, but I'm glad you're taking the time to celebrate when you can.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. So let's talk about the gods below, because I know that we're trying not to look at the clock too much, but I know you have to leave, in 15 minutes or so. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the gods below and what it's all about?
Yeah, so The Gods Below is the start to another epic fantasy trilogy. It is set on a hollow world where magic exists as particles in the air, and they become more and more dense the closer that you get to the center of the world, which is where the gods live. And it centers around two sisters who get separated by a cataclysmic event and end up on opposite sides of clandestine war between the gods. So that is like the basic premise. I feel like if I ever go into any more, I end up like, la 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 la, going on and like explaining too much. But that is the basic premise for the book.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's so many different things that you could talk about for sure. I'm interested in knowing. You maybe touched on this a little bit, but after the success of the Drowning Empire, and you've spent, a few years writing this trilogy and finishing this trilogy, what was it like venturing into a new story?
It's extremely nerve-wracking. It's so funny because when I wrote The Bone Char Daughter, when it released, I had very little anxiety about it because there were no expectations, right?
Right.
And then now with a completely new series, I was very extremely anxious about it. It was like waking up in the middle of the night, like just in the months leading up to release.
Hmm.
First off, wondering, did I fix that problem? And then second, just like wondering how it would be received. I mean, I've tried to make my peace with it. I think it's hard to intellectualize anxiety. It doesn't really help. But I just know, like, some people are going to enjoy it more than the Drowning Empire, and some
Hmm.
people are going to enjoy it less because it is different. The
Yeah.
world is different, the characters are different, the tone is different. But at the same time, it's like I couldn't do the same thing over again
Right.
because I feel like if I didn't try this, then I wouldn't really be stretching myself, right?
Hmm.
So, and part of the whole thing about writing is you do want to grow, you do want to change. I mean, at least I do. I think it's fine for people that don't want to, that, have similar ideas or similar themes they want to cover.
Yeah.
But I did want to do something different. So we'll see. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm loving it so far, and I mean, I think that yeah, I won't fanboy too
that's
much
good
about
to
it,
hear.
but
I
I'm
do feel
enjoying
like
it.
I do feel like it's a little bit more esoteric than like Drowning Empire. Like I tell
Right.
people, I'm like, if you are new to fantasy, you can pick up the Bone Shard Daughter and like you'll be fine, you know? I
Yeah,
take good
right.
care of you. And then but the Gods Below, I'm like, if you pick that up and you are new to fantasy, I think that you would get a little bit lost.
I can
So
see that. Yeah,
yeah.
I can see that, and I don't think that's a bad thing because everyone's got their entry points and their level of fantasy that they're looking for, right? Um,
Yeah.
but I think that does raise a good point, and something I wanted to talk about anyway are your magic systems, because you've got two very unique magic systems in your two different series. So I'm interested a little bit about the process that you use to create your magic systems. Does your magic system come to you first? How does it all work together when you come up
Uh
with them?
I mean, the magic system came to me first in the Bone Shard Daughter just because the initial event for that was my friend like almost choking on a shard of bone. And then I was like, wow, what if shards of bone and magic? And then I kind of
Hmm.
just mashed it together with other concepts that I really wanted to write about, like constructs. But part of it too is that I love science fiction. I grew up on a lot of science fiction. My dad had us watching Next Generation, Star
Nice.
Trek.
That's me too.
So
That's what I grew up on too. The next
yeah,
generation.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I love to bring kind of science fiction concepts into
Nice.
fantasy
Love
because I
it.
don't feel like fantasy and science fiction are that different. I often say like space opera is basically the twin to epic fantasy, just on the
Yeah.
science fiction side.
Absolutely.
So I often think about scientific things that I find very fascinating. Like in Bone Shard Daughter, I did pull some inspiration from computer programming when I was writing that, and like
Okay.
that fallibility of language. Like you mess up a piece of code, and it has very sometimes unintended consequences.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I'm a web designer during my day job. So, and now that you say it, I'm like, I totally get that in the Bone Shark Daughter. I love
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
yeah. There's like little bugs and little ways that people can find their way around these
Yeah.
commands because language is fallible. And then when I was writing The Gods Below, I was thinking a lot about like scuba diving and spelunking. Like so,
Okay.
I enjoy scuba diving. Well, at least I did before I had kids. But there are so many small things that can go wrong.
Hmm.
And I'm very, very fascinated by those things. Like, for
Right.
instance, nitrogen narcosis, where you get too much nitrogen in your blood and you start feeling like kind of funny, like everything's okay, when sometimes things are like terribly wrong, or you start
Right.
swimming in the wrong direction, like things
Yeah.
like
Right.
that. And then just this desire that people have to go to these terrible places that
Hmm.
just because they want to see and know more. So
Right.
like that was part of the inspiration. Obviously, like with the air, with magic existing as particles in the air, part of this magic system is that they have to hold their breath
Hmm.
in order to do magic because they breathe in this magic and it reacts with something else, the stones that they have. I don't want to like get too far into it, but
Yeah.
if they let out that breath, then they no longer have the magic. And again, that's like part of it. I was thinking scuba diving, swimming, like just the things that I find really fascinating.
Right. Yeah.
So I love to pull those things in
Yeah.
and
I
use
love
them as
it.
part of my magic system because it's something that I know that I'm already very interested in.
That's really cool. Now, where in the process of creating the story does the magic come into play for you? Like, are you creating kind of a plot and working the magic into it, or does the plot kind of work around the magic you've created? Like, what does that look like, or is it different every
So it's
time?
both. I feel like these things interact and I feel like they do so quite naturally. As far as like, it might surprise people, but as far as like the magic system goes in The Gods Below, I actually didn't think about the breath holding aspect until I'd finished the first draft. And then I was like, wait. This feels like there's not enough limitations on it. And if
Mm.
it's in the air, it makes sense then that they couldn't use it anymore once they let out their breath. And then I had to go
Right.
back and like do a series of revisions because I had to rethink everything because as soon as the magic system changes, that does have these domino effects. So, for
Hmm.
instance, because this person has to hold their breath, And because that can cause them to pass out and because they're vulnerable when they need to take a breath, I was like, well, there got to be like a supporting team. So that was like a creation of the second draft.
Okay.
Like those characters did not even exist in the first draft. Like that whole system did not exist. It did not. So I had to go back and actually create these characters, like create this whole system that they had. And yeah, so when you ask like what comes first, it's like I feel like that's a chicken and the egg kind of question.
Right. Yeah.
Where it's like these things all work together and there's really no like dividing line between them.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it always fascinates me, kind of how those things evolve and the different things. Like, oh, you got to the end and realized things needed to be different in order for it to quite work in the way you intended for it at the end. But yeah, like, or even just kind of, I'm always fascinated where the spark of an idea comes. Like, if it's the magic was the idea that you had first and this plot evolved around it, or if it was, you had this story and, well, what kind of magic would work in this sort of world? So
it's funny because like for me, like I feel like inspiration is just from mashing ideas together that I've been thinking about.
Okay.
Yeah, because I knew I wanted to write a hollow world. I knew I wanted to have like a unique magic system with the magic existing in the air, and like so I just like kind of mash ideas together basically.
Right. Yeah.
That I'm thinking about.
I love it. Now, and you talked about this a little bit too, but can you just talk a bit about the importance of having a cost to your magic? And you talked about that in your having to go back and revisions, but authors looking to build a magic system, both of your magic systems, I feel like, have a high cost attached to them. What's the importance of that, and how does that play into the rest of how the story develops?
Yeah, I mean, magic definitely has to have a cost, because if there's no cost, what happens is that your plot falls apart. Because then like people start asking, well, if they could do this magic thing, why wouldn't they do this magic thing to fix XYZ problem? So then it becomes an issue with your plot. So if you don't have limitations, then that starts to fall apart. And it also just doesn't feel quite natural, because I think people are used to things having a cost, right? Like you want to pursue something, then you can't pursue something else because you have a limited amount of time in the day. Like there always are limitations to what we do.
Yeah.
And to how we exist and how we interact with the world. So for magic to also have a limitation just feels right to people.
Right.
In addition to that, making your plot actually go.
For sure, yeah. And I think back to, some stories where there was a piece of magic that maybe didn't have those limitations, or limitations weren't explained, and you have those questions of, why didn't they use this to defeat the villain instead of like doing this goofy thing? Harry Potter. Right? So,
well, I mean, like if the vibes
right?
Are strong enough, right? You can do anything you want.
For sure. Really cool. So you're working on book 2. You've got you said your deadline's in 5 weeks, that's incredible to me, just knowing how soon or how recent The Gods Below came out, that your deadline is that quick.
Well, it was before my book came out before,
really?
But
Wow.
but I didn't make that, so
Okay.
I had to ask for an extension.
Yeah, that's fair. So when does that book? What's the scheduled release for that book?
We don't have a scheduled release yet. I'm assuming probably sometime late fall next year.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah, I find that all interesting. I talked mostly to indie authors on the show, so the traditional publishing scheduling is always a bit of a mystery to me. So
it's so funny, because it's like I feel like I'm living simultaneously in the past and the future, because oh look here, this book that I worked on a year ago has just come out and people are just now reading it.
Right.
And then I'm also like working on this book that's not going to come out for another year. So
yeah, and I think that makes it even more important, like you said, to appreciate the present and celebrate the wins that are happening now.
Absolutely.
Because of what you've done in the past and what you're working on to do in the future, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So Andrea, this is the greatest podcast in the multiverse. So can you tell our listeners how in a parallel universe a different decision might have shaped another version of your life?
Oh gosh. Okay. So back when I was younger, I was a competitive swimmer and I was quite good at it. But I realized I could not keep doing that if I wanted to have time to write. So,
Hmm.
so I quit competitive swimming
Wow.
and focused on writing because I realized like my time was becoming narrower and narrower the older that I got. And yeah, so in
Wow.
another life, maybe I would have done that. I don't know.
That's incredible. Yeah, I don't even know what's like good for you, like for following your dream, even though it meant on giving up on something you were already doing. Like, were you like competitive swimmer? Like, you were competing in events and that sort of thing as well.
Yeah, I would never have gone
Huh.
to like the Olympics or anything, but I could have done
Okay.
it like, in college and
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. That's really cool. So,
Yeah.
I mean, your love of writing was just that strong that you realized that it was time.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really cool. Really cool. Andrea, thank you so much for joining me today. Can you just let our listeners know where the best place to find you and follow you is?
Yeah, so I am on Twitter, on Instagram, on Threads, and sadly I am on TikTok. It's Andrea G. Stewart. That's the handle for all of those sites. So
Very cool. I'll make sure to link all of those in the show notes below. Thank you so much once again for joining me. I'm so glad that you were able to join me, and this has been great. Thank you for coming.
thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.